She stood alone, the chill of early morning rain soaking through her coat as it always did on Sundays. Her fingers, cold and trembling, clutched the folded flag she never let go of. Captain Daniel Clark, U.S. Army, was buried beneath the earth 6 months ago, but the question still screamed louder than the 21-gun salute that had echoed through her soul. Amelia hadn't missed a single Sunday since his death. She knelt, brushing damp pine needles from the base of the stone. The marble, pristine and official, offered nothing but what the government allowed: name, rank, and dates. Nothing about the man. Nothing about his smile, the way he made pancakes on Sunday mornings, or how he whispered, "I love you," like it was sacred. Just cold letters carved into a cold stone. And under her breath, she said what she said every week. "They lied to me, didn't they?" She didn't cry loudly anymore. Grief had moved past the sobbing stage. Now it clung to her in silence. No answers from his unit. No records of where he'd been deployed. Just a call, a flag, and a speech about sacrifice. Her calls to the base went unanswered. Her requests for his personal effects had been ignored. She was left with a shell, a mystery in camouflage. And worse, subtle reminders she didn't belong. She remembered the glances at the funeral, mostly from Daniel's commanding officers. The sideways stares. Her darker skin, her Afghan father's last name hyphenated onto Clark's. A widow, yes, but a tolerated one. Her love never looked enough for their standards, and now, they were glad to bury it with him. There'd been no support group, no outreach. Just a folded flag and a space to grieve, alone. That morning, a voice interrupted the rain. "You don't know me, but I knew your husband." She turned sharply. A man stood 10 feet away, hands raised slightly as if approaching a wounded animal. Early 40s, neatly trimmed beard, dark coat clinging to his shoulders. There was something in his eyes, haunted, tired, yet deliberate. "What did you say?" Her voice cracked. "I knew Daniel," he said again, quieter. "We served together." Amelia stood, unsure whether to scream or run. "What unit?" He shook his head. "I can't tell you that. It wasn't on the books." She stepped back. "So you expect me to believe a complete stranger, who shows up at my husband's grave saying he knew him, and I'm just supposed to what, thank you for your service?" "I didn't come for thanks," he said. "I came because no one else will tell you what really happened. And you deserve to know." She stared at him. "You're lying." He reached into his coat, slowly, and pulled out a worn photograph. It was of Daniel, shirtless and smiling, arm around a group of men in desert gear. They looked tired, muddy, alive. Daniel's eyes burned like they used to when he came home on leave and picked her up at the airport. Not staged. Real. She grabbed it, breath caught in her throat. Where was this taken? Somalia. Northern sector. We weren't supposed to be there. She stared at the picture again, then him. "He never told me anything about Somalia. Not even a whisper." "He couldn't," the man replied. "Orders. Gagged missions. The kind you don't come back from with a medal. Or a name on a wall." "Then why are you telling me?" she asked, voice suddenly hard. "Why now?" "Because he died a hero. And they let you believe it was routine. That it was random. It wasn't." The words sat like concrete in her stomach. She wanted to yell, to accuse him of cruelty, of exploiting her grief. But something in his eyes stopped her. This wasn't a man full of secrets. This was a man broken by them. "I don't even know your name," she said finally. "Cole. Cole Ramirez." She repeated it to herself. "Why come to me?" "Because Daniel told me that if something happened to him, and I survived, I needed to find you. You were everything to him." Her chest tightened. "They said it was an IED. That he was on patrol." Cole shook his head. "He was rescuing children. Girls being trafficked. That patrol was a cover." Amelia looked away, tears stinging. "And they erased it." "They always do," Cole said. "But not this time. Not if you help me finish what he started." She looked back up. "Help you?" "Expose them. All of them. The contractors, the officers, the ones who pocketed the silence. You're the only one they didn't expect to fight back. She laughed bitterly. I'm a widow, not a warrior. You loved him. That makes you stronger than they ever imagined. Silence fell between them. Amelia looked down at the photograph again. She hadn't seen that version of Daniel in over a year. Alive, determined, free. The man she buried had come home in a sealed casket. Now, another piece of him lay in her hand. Her instincts screamed that this was dangerous, that trusting this man might break her further. But grief wasn't just sadness, it was rage, confusion, a fire with no air. And Cole's words, insane as they were, gave it oxygen. I'm not promising anything, she said at last. But if you lie to me, if this is some game, you'll never see me again, Cole finished. But if you listen, I'll show you who your husband really was. For the first time in weeks, Amelia didn't feel hollow. She felt terrified, curious, awake. She slipped the photo into her coat pocket, glanced once more at Daniel Stone, and walked away, not from him, but toward a truth no one else had dared give her. The coffee on her kitchen table sat untouched, steam fading just like the control she once had over her life. Amelia couldn't sleep. She stared at the photograph, Daniel with dirt on his face, his arm around Cole, laughing like death wasn't breathing down their neck. She flipped it over. No writing. Just silence. That man, Cole Ramirez, had vanished as suddenly as he appeared. No calls. No email. No further contact. She had tried to find anything about him online, but there was nothing. No social media. No military records. No proof. If he was real, he was hidden. On Thursday, a package appeared on her doorstep. No return address. Inside was a flash drive, a single envelope, and a note in handwriting she recognized instantly. Amelia, if you're reading this, I'm gone. But I trusted Cole with everything. He saved more than just me. Listen to him. Love you forever. D. Her heart punched against her ribs. Daniel's handwriting. His sharp curves, his slant. She backed away from the table like it might explode. She plugged the flash drive into her laptop. A video began, grainy, time-stamped, covert. It showed Daniel in a dim room, kneeling beside terrified children behind a locked cage. Gunshots in the distance. His voice whispered, "We get them out now, or they die in here." Her lungs forgot how to breathe. The video cut to black. Then another. Daniel arguing with a white-haired man in uniform. No sound, just fury. She watched his finger jab the air, then saw his body slump as if realizing he was alone. She stared at the blank screen. Everything they'd told her, routine patrol, IED, quick death, it was all a lie. He had died for something, not in some roadside accident. He had died trying to save someone, and they buried that truth. The next day Cole was back. Not at the grave. At her door. His eyes were tired, but resolute. "You got the flash drive," he said. She nodded. "Then you know why I'm here." "I know why he died," she said, voice hollow. "No. You know how. You don't know why yet." She let him in, against every voice in her head screaming not to. He sat across from her, arms resting on his knees. Not like a soldier. Like a man trying not to fall apart. Daniel found something he wasn't supposed to. During our last mission, we were sent to recover a diplomat's daughter from a failed compound. What we found instead was a human trafficking ring, government-funded. Under the radar. Protected. He refused to walk away. "And you?" she asked. "I followed orders." "At first." His voice cracked. He didn't cry, but the guilt on his face did. Amelia hated that she understood it. "You watched those kids suffer?" "We all did," he said. "Until Daniel couldn't. He stole intel. Took photos. Names. Timelines. He told me he'd leak it if Command tried to erase it." "And they did," she whispered. Cole nodded. "They tried to discredit him. Said he was unstable. Off mission. They ordered me to detain him. I didn't. I helped him escape. But they caught up eventually. Amelia pressed her hands together to stop the trembling. So what now? You just disappear again? Tell me stories and vanish. No, he said. We expose them. Together. I'm a nurse. Not a whistleblower. You're the only person they wouldn't expect to speak. That gives you power. You have his letters. You have the flash drive. You can make them listen. And if I do, she said, they'll destroy me too. He didn't deny it. Just looked at her with the steadiness of someone who knew exactly what it cost to speak. They already took everything from you, he said. Why let them own what's left? His words lit something in her. Not rage. Not revenge. Something deeper. Purpose. Amelia reached into a drawer, pulled out a shoebox of Daniel's things, dog tags, old journal pages, scraps he'd mailed her from base. They meant nothing alone. But together, they were a puzzle the government hadn't expected anyone to finish. She spread the pieces out across the table. Cole sat with her, pointing out names she didn't recognize. Her fingers moved quickly, scanning, arranging, highlighting inconsistencies. His memory filled in gaps. Her questions turned sharp. This name, General Matheson, she said. He was on the defense committee during Daniel's deployment. But his name's on this receipt for a black site facility. Cole nodded. That's the linchpin. He signed the transfer orders. He funded the operation under humanitarian aid. That's how they hid it. They worked through the night. Not as widow and stranger, but as two people trying to drag truth out of shadows. Amelia had never felt so awake. So necessary. By morning, the table looked like a war zone of papers and timelines. But they had something solid. A trail. A pattern. You'll need protection, Cole said. Once we go public, they'll come for you. She shook her head. I'm not hiding. Then I won't either. She looked at him. There was nothing romantic in the air, no spark. But there was trust. Something real. Something earned. He stood, walked to the door, then paused. They'll discredit me. Say I'm unstable, dishonorably discharged. They've already buried my record. Then I'll be the one who tells them who you are, she said. I'll speak. Loudly. Cole nodded, a flicker of something like peace in his eyes. As he left, Amelia turned back to the photo of Daniel. Her husband had been a hero. Not because the government said so, but because he chose to fight even when it meant dying alone. And now, finally, she had a way to finish what he started. She opened a blank email draft, addressed it to every media outlet and veterans' rights organization she could find. Then she attached the first file. Her finger hovered over send. Daniel had died trying to give others a voice. It was time she used hers. Ask ChatGPT. The fallout was immediate. 24 hours after Amelia sent the files, her inbox flooded. Reporters asking for interviews, anonymous warnings to back off, and military personnel denying everything. Some messages were veiled threats, others laced with passive concern. Think of your safety, Mrs. Clark. There are things you don't understand. But she understood more than they realized. Daniel hadn't been confused or reckless. He had been right. And now she was in the crosshairs because she dared to agree. The story broke on a small independent news site first. Within hours, it spread to major platforms. Headlines flashed across screens. Leaked documents suggest military cover-up of international trafficking operation. One journalist named Daniel directly, calling him a whistleblower silenced in the line of duty. Amelia's name appeared in the byline, not as a victim, but as the source. Cole kept a low profile. They met at different cafes, always changing locations. He monitored the chatter in classified forums, intercepting communications between retired officers and current government contact. They were scared. Not because of what Amelia had said, but because she had proof. Daniel's files included timestamps, emails, classified rosters, enough to link top officials to black site funding and off-the-books troop movement. Still, there was resistance. Old friends turned cold. A veterans association she'd donated to for years removed her name from their newsletter. Her apartment complex received a noise complaint she knew was fabricated. Her supervisor at the hospital suggested she take a leave of absence. People she once trusted now viewed her as unstable, manipulated, or worse, disloyal. But something inside her hardened. Every attempt to silence her made her louder. She began organizing every piece of Daniel's journal into a coherent timeline. Each entry, coded phrase, or mission reference was paired with a leaked document Cole helped source. Together, they created a map of how corruption had been sustained, how people in power had sacrificed lives, dignity, and truth for money and silence. She submitted a full report to a congressional watchdog agency. Weeks passed with no official reply. But the silence was louder than denial. They were scrambling. One evening, Cole arrived at her door with a different look in his eyes. He wasn't calm, he was boiling. They just promoted General Matheson to oversee foreign aid logistics, he said. After everything. They're circling the wagons, Amelia said. No, he replied. They're preparing to bury you. She set down her glass. Then we dig deeper. He handed her a folder. This is everything I was too afraid to copy before. Orders. Dispatch logs. Redacted memos with Matheson's initials. She opened it. There it was, dozens of pages implicating high-ranking officials in misuse of aid, illegal detainment, and collusion with private contractors. The evidence was damning. This could ruin them, she said. This could ruin you, he reminded her. There's no going back. I already passed the point of return. Amelia began working with a group of independent investigative journalists. She refused to do TV interviews. She didn't want attention, just accountability. She recorded a video statement instead, clear and composed, explaining Daniel's death, the cover-up, and her intention to seek justice. The video went viral. Suddenly, people began to listen. Other military families reached out. Widows, parents, siblings. They, too, had lost someone under strange circumstances. Some had been told their loved ones died in training exercises. No explanation. Others were denied the return of personal belongings. They were gaslighted into silence. Amelia's voice became theirs. At a public forum organized by a Veterans Truth Coalition, she stood at the podium and read Daniel's words aloud. If I die for something they won't name, make sure someone does. The room erupted in silence, a heavy, aching pause that settled deep into every person's chest. A retired colonel approached her after the event. His hands trembled as he handed her an old photo. Your husband saved my niece, he said. She was one of the girls in that cage. She's in college now. She didn't know what to say. Some of us knew, the colonel added, but we didn't speak. You are braver than we were. Amelia felt the weight of his words like a second flag folded into her hands. But it wasn't validation she wanted, it was change. The government finally responded. A hearing was scheduled. Congressional oversight. Whistleblower testimony. She was summoned to testify. Cole wasn't. His presence was considered compromising. But she insisted his written statement be included. In the days before the hearing, Amelia worked around the clock to prepare. Every document, photo, and journal entry had to be airtight. They would try to discredit her, paint her as an emotional widow grasping at conspiracies. But she wasn't broken. She wasn't grieving anymore. She was furious and focused. The night before the hearing, she visited Daniel's grave again. No tears this time. No whispered pleas. Just a simple promise. They'll hear you tomorrow. As she left, she noticed someone watching from a distance. Not Cole. Someone else. Tall. Military bearing. Sunglasses despite the overcast sky. She didn't acknowledge them. Just kept walking. They were scared. And they should be. For the first time, she felt what Daniel must have felt. The rage of seeing injustice and knowing silence protects it. The pressure of doing the right thing while carrying the cost. The loneliness of leadership. The hearing chamber was full. Senators on one side. Press behind them. Lights, cameras, silence. She raised her right hand and took the oath. And when she began to speak, she didn't start with Daniel. She started with the little girl in the cage. The silence that followed was the loudest thing she'd ever heard. Ask ChatGPT. The hearing opened floodgates. Her testimony, broadcast across networks, ignited a public firestorm. Committee members squirmed in their seats while she recited precise dates, quoted journal entries, and referred to classified memos now public domain. For the first time, names had faces and silence had weight. But as the cameras shut off and headlines praised her bravery, the real fight began. A week later, Amelia received an anonymous email. "You've made powerful enemies. Be careful who you trust." Attached was a scan of her personnel file, altered. Notes she had never seen before. Phrases like emotionally unstable, prone to paranoia, potential mental health risk. The system was rebranding her. If they couldn't silence her voice, they'd discredit her mind. She sent the file to Cole, who confirmed it. "They're launching a character smear," he said. "It's standard. You're becoming a threat." "What's the counter move?" she asked. "Expose them faster than they can rewrite you." She doubled down. Within days, she partnered with a data leak organization that offered encrypted publication of sensitive files. Together, they began releasing one batch per week. Procurement receipts from shell companies, offshore bank transfers tied to defense contractors, internal memos approving unauthorized operations. Each drop added fuel. Protests erupted outside Capitol buildings. Lawmakers issued press statements distancing themselves from Matheson and his allies. The Senate Intelligence Committee requested an emergency inquiry. Amelia, once a silent widow, was now a symbol of resistance. But symbols attract threats. Her apartment was broken into one night. Nothing stolen. Just ransacked. Her laptop, untouched, but her bedroom drawers emptied onto the floor. A message. "We can reach you." Cole moved her to a secure location the same night. It was a small safe house managed by retired veterans who had followed her story and volunteered to protect her. There, she met a man named Earl, a retired intelligence analyst who had served in covert operations in the 90s. Earl offered more than safety. He brought data. Files he'd kept in silence, hoping someone would come along who might use them. "You're the first one reckless enough to try," he said with a grin. Together, they found links between the current black site activity and older programs shut down after public scandals decades ago. Nothing ever ended, it just changed names, faces, and contracts. Amelia realized the corruption wasn't new. It was generational, institutional, but now finally exposed. Still, danger pressed closer. Earl warned her the deeper they dug, the more personal it would get. She didn't flinch. Then came the subpoena. Amelia was ordered to turn over all files in her possession under national security pretense. Failure to comply would result in legal action. She countered with a public statement. "When justice is buried under red tape, it's not law, it's fear. And I don't fear you." The next day, she received a phone call from Matheson himself. "I underestimated you," he said calmly. "You were supposed to cry and move on. You murdered my husband. He died a soldier." "No," she replied. "He died a human. Something you never were." He chuckled. "If you think this ends with hearings and headlines, you're still naive." She hung up, but not before recording the entire call. It was sent immediately to her legal team and news contact. Within hours, it played on national radio. Now, even more turned against Matheson. Public figures, military families, celebrities, people who never noticed until now. The story wasn't about war anymore. It was about power, about accountability, about a culture that punished truth and protected silence. Through it all, Cole remained her anchor. He said little, but acted decisively, securing evidence, arranging communication with lawmakers, and preparing legal counters for every attempt made against her. They never discussed what they were becoming, but it lived in the quiet moments between chaos. The way he looked at her when she wasn't watching, the way she reached for his hand when no words were enough. They weren't in love. They were in something harder. Trust. And trust in this war was everything. She met with a group of congressional reformers next. Young, idealistic, and outraged by the scandal. They asked her what she wanted. "I want legislation," she said. "Whistleblower protections. Permanent oversight on Black Ops funding. Public acknowledgement for the fallen who were never counted. And I want the Department of Defense to officially clear my husband's name." They asked if she had the patience to wait through years of bureaucratic wrestling. She didn't blink. "He died trying to save lives. I'll spend mine making sure it wasn't erased." One of them, a young congresswoman, leaned forward. "You'd make a hell of a witness in policy hearings." Amelia shook her head. "I'm not a witness. I'm a reminder." The reforms took shape slowly. Committees drafted bills. Debates grew heated. Lobbyists fought to water them down. But the noise was different now. Amelia's face, not visible but symbolic, appeared in every article, every debate, every protest. She was no longer just the widow of Captain Daniel Clark. She was the woman who stood when every force told her to kneel. And people listened. 1 month later, a bill was passed in the House to launch a task force for accountability in off-the-record military operations. Another bill followed, titled the Clark Act, mandating transparency in Special Operations Fatality Report. It wasn't enough, but it was a start. She received a sealed envelope shortly after. Inside, a single sheet. Status, honorable. Mission, classified. Recognition, deferred. The military had amended Daniel's record. Quietly, of course. No apology. No ceremony. Just a whisper in a system that never apologized. But to Amelia it meant the world. She folded the paper neatly and placed it next to his flag. She had made the truth louder than their silence. And it was only the beginning. Ask ChatGPT. The pressure began to wear on them. Amelia barely slept. Cole grew quieter with every passing day. The weight of what they carried wasn't just legal or political, it was personal. Too many memories buried in the evidence they gathered. Too many names without graves. In private, the air between them was heavy with unspoken truths. One night, Amelia sat reviewing statements from other widows when she noticed Cole standing by the window, staring into the dark. His jaw clenched, eyes distant. She could see it, the guilt, the hesitation, the burden he hadn't named yet. "What aren't you telling me?" she asked. He didn't turn. "You don't want to know. I already know everything about what they did to Daniel," she said. "The only thing I don't know is what you're still hiding." He took a breath, slow and bitter. "The day he died. I could have stopped it." Her hands froze on the keyboard. "We were supposed to rendezvous, evacuate together. But I got an order to fall back, to leave him behind and let the site burn. I hesitated. Just for a minute. But I still obeyed." Amelia's throat tightened. "I told myself he'd make it out," Cole continued. "He always did. But when I heard the blast on comms, I knew. I knew, and I didn't go back." She stood slowly. Her voice was flat. "You left him." "I followed orders." "No," she snapped. "You abandoned him." He finally turned to face her. "I didn't come here to be forgiven." "Then why did you come?" she asked, her voice trembling. "To clear your conscience? To feel like less of a coward?" "I came because he made me promise that if he didn't make it, I'd tell you the truth. All of it. And because I owed him more than silence." Tears threatened to rise, but she didn't let them fall. She was too angry, too exhausted, too devastated by the one man she trusted becoming part of the same betrayal. "You think helping me now makes up for what you didn't do then?" "No," he said. "It doesn't. Nothing does." She walked past him, her steps sharp. "I need time. Alone." He nodded and left without another word. The silence after he left wasn't relief. It was suffocating. Amelia stared at the photo of Daniel again. A man who had believed in doing the right thing, no matter the cost. He had trusted Cole. So had she. And now the truth was that trust had been misplaced. But as the hours passed, her fury began to melt, not into forgiveness, but into understanding. Daniel had died a hero. Cole hadn't. But Cole had chosen to come back. He could have vanished, could have hidden his guilt in comfort and distance. Instead, he brought it to her doorstep, willing to be hated for the truth. That didn't erase what he did. But it meant something. The next morning, Amelia stood outside the safe house, staring at the horizon when Cole returned. He didn't speak, didn't try to explain himself again. She handed him a folder. These are the names of 2 other survivors from that mission. One of them reached out last night. He blinked, surprised. You're still doing this, with me? She nodded once. Not because I forgive you, but because Daniel would have wanted someone to finish what he started. He accepted the folder with both hands, his shoulders heavier than before. It wasn't acceptance. It was duty. They met with the survivor that afternoon. Sergeant Malik Dunham, retired, withdrawn, and hesitant. He confirmed everything. The orders to stand down. The knowledge of the trafficking. The command structure involved. And he handed them the last piece of evidence they didn't have. A recording of a call between General Matheson and a private contractor discussing asset disposal. It was the nail in the coffin. They took it to a federal prosecutor working on national security reform. She agreed to reopen the criminal inquiry against Matheson, now backed with witness testimony and hard proof. Charges were filed. Subpoenas issued. Arrests made quietly. Within weeks, it was official. Matheson was indicted. News of the indictment spread fast. The public, once captivated by Amelia's grief and bravery, now watched her as the face of justice. Even those who had doubted her began to retract their words. She issued a brief statement. No celebration. No revenge. Just truth. As things calmed, she and Cole sat side by side, watching coverage of the case's developments. For once, there was no plan, no strategy. Just silence. He broke it first. I never asked you to understand. I don't, she replied. But I believe you've changed. He looked at her, unsure what to say. She continued, not because of me. Because you finally stopped obeying silence. It wasn't love. It wasn't healing. It was something else. A bond forged not from romance, but redemption. Cole stood to leave but paused. If you ever tell your story fully, don't leave out the part where I failed him. She shook her head. I won't. But I'll also tell them you came back. He didn't smile. But his eyes, for once, carried peace. The indictment of General Matheson wasn't the end, it was the start of a reckoning. With pressure mounting, Congress scrambled to contain the fallout. The Clark Act, initially a symbolic gesture, gained real traction. Amelia was invited to consult with legislative aides, but she insisted on sitting at the table, not behind it. She wasn't a grieving wife anymore. She was a force that wouldn't be boxed into polite roles or ceremonial appearances. The task force began assembling, tasked with reviewing and revising oversight on covert military operations. Amelia pushed for a clause that required independent civilian review of classified missions involving foreign aid or humanitarian claims. Lawmakers hesitated, too radical, too invasive, too expensive, but she didn't waver. She laid out how Daniel's mission had been labeled humanitarian while being used as a cover for trafficking. She made them listen. She made them admit the flaws in the system they upheld. Support came from unexpected places. A junior senator from Texas, a former Marine, endorsed the civilian review clause, citing the same guilt Amelia had seen in Cole's eyes. More voices joined. Veterans, activists, journalists. The hearings stretched for weeks, and Amelia remained relentless. She corrected misstatements in real time. She challenged euphemisms. She refused compromise dressed up as progress. The bill passed with narrow margins. The Clark Act was now law. But legal change didn't fix everything. In the shadows, retaliation continued. Whistleblowers connected to Amelia's case faced job losses. One was blacklisted from a defense contractor. Another received threats that forced her into hiding. Amelia knew she had a new mission: protect those who stepped forward. She partnered with advocacy groups and started a foundation named after Daniel, focused on supporting families of military whistleblowers. She became a mentor to people she'd never meet: young soldiers sending encrypted messages, military spouses sending anonymous tips. They trusted her, not because she had power, but because she had proven she wouldn't abandon them. She gave speeches at universities, appeared on panels, always faceless, always focused on principle over recognition. Meanwhile, Cole worked behind the scenes, helping secure asylum for survivors of trafficking rings connected to the Black Site operation. His old contacts in South America and Africa stepped forward discreetly, offering aid where governments failed. He didn't ask for acknowledgement. He didn't want redemption. He just kept working, quietly, persistently, driven by something deeper than guilt now. Their paths converged again when a new investigation surfaced, this time tied to another covert program echoing the same abuses. Amelia met with an international coalition in Geneva, sharing everything she had learned. The room was filled with lawyers, human rights workers, and intelligence operatives who listened to her not as a victim, but as an authority. She presented evidence that American funds had indirectly enabled human trafficking in war zones. She named names. She cited outcomes. Her testimony laid the groundwork for international policy discussions. What began as a personal tragedy had become a global conversation. In private, Amelia wrestled with the toll. She missed Daniel every day, not just the memory of him, but the life they never got to build. The children they never had. The quiet years he was supposed to live. Some nights she replayed his voice messages just to hear something real, not bureaucratic jargon or strategy. But she never allowed grief to derail the mission. She carried it with her, not as a wound but as a weapon. A sharpened edge she turned against complacency, against denial, against power that assumed it would never be challenged. Her advocacy reached schools and civic centers. She created educational programs about ethical military conduct. Survivor support networks grew under her foundation's guidance. Eventually, even a few Pentagon officials approached her privately, not to dismiss her, but to learn from her. One of them, a colonel in charge of internal audits, handed her a file. Inside were names of lower-ranking officers pressured to look the other way during operations like Daniel's. "These are good people," he said. "They were trapped. Help them if you can." She did. Some of those names became key allies. Others came forward publicly, risking careers. Her network was growing, not out of rebellion, but out of shared purpose. They didn't want to tear down institutions. They wanted to rebuild them, stronger, cleaner, honest. In the background, Cole submitted a report that triggered investigations into private security firms. His work exposed false contracts and missing funds tied to humanitarian front. Arrests followed. His name never made headlines, but those who mattered knew where the fire had come from. Months passed. The headlines slowed. The outrage faded into newer scandals. But the impact remained. Whistleblower protections were expanded federally. Families previously denied death benefits under classified circumstances were now granted full honors. Daniel's name was formally added to a memorial wall he'd once been erased from. Quiet justice. The kind that doesn't make noise but changes things anyway. Amelia received a call from the Secretary of Defense. They offered her a civilian advisory role. She declined. "I'm more useful outside your walls," she said. Uncontrolled. Undistracted. Instead, she requested funding for her foundation, oversight independence for military-affiliated nonprofits, and a permanent public database documenting misconduct tied to covert operations. They agreed to most of it. In her final address to Congress, she ended with a message that wasn't emotional, but directive. We honor our heroes by preventing the next silence, not by mourning the last one. The applause was respectful, restrained. But it wasn't for a widow. It was for a leader. Her voice had changed policy. Her fight had rewritten narratives. Her loss had become legacy. And she still wasn't done. Amelia stood before a crowd of young recruits, their uniforms crisp, faces expectant, some nervous, some proud. She had been invited to speak not as a widow, not even as an activist, but as someone who had forced a system to acknowledge its flaws. She didn't talk about medals or patriotism. She talked about choices. About listening when it's easier to obey. About conscience when orders go wrong. She ended with Daniel's words, the ones that had changed everything. If I die for something they won't name, make sure someone does. There was silence when she finished, not from disinterest, but from impact. These weren't empty words from a podium. They were instructions passed down from the fallen to the living. After the speech, a young soldier approached her, eyes sharp with understanding. My cousin was in the same unit. He disappeared 3 years ago. They said he went AWOL. But no one believed it. Amelia didn't promise answers. She offered her card. That's what her life had become. A link in a chain, a point of contact for the forgotten, the buried, the written off. She had built something bigger than herself now, and it needed to outlive her. The Clark Foundation expanded internationally within a year. Survivors of similar covert tragedies in foreign militaries began reaching out. A case in France mirrored Daniel's. Another in Colombia echoed the same blueprint, humanitarian missions masking exploitation. Amelia's network compiled data, cross-referenced names, built visual maps of misconduct. It was undeniable. This wasn't an American disease. It was systemic, global, and fed by the same thing everywhere: unchecked power. Cole's work became more remote, more dangerous. He operated from multiple locations, often sending encrypted updates from unstable regions. He was still in the fight, but his face had become a liability. There were moments when Amelia didn't hear from him for weeks. She worried, but she didn't wait. If he had taught her anything, it was that fear couldn't be a full-time job. Then came the night she received his final message. Whatever happens next, I don't regret telling you the truth. You gave it weight. You gave it a future. See. There were no details. Just that. No location. No sign-in trail. Amelia read it 3 times, heart heavy, then closed the laptop. She didn't panic. She didn't cry. She simply added his name to the encrypted ledger under confirmed missing. It wasn't a surrender. It was an acknowledgement that some fights didn't end with clarity. But she kept going. Amelia was nominated for a Global Peace Initiative Award. She declined. Not because she didn't appreciate it, but because she didn't want her face on a stage, smiling next to people who'd never lived what she lived. Instead, she asked that the funds go to building a legal defense hub for whistleblowers who couldn't afford to lose everything just for telling the truth. They agreed. Years passed, but the fire didn't fade. She aged with it, grew stronger in purpose. People began calling her a leader, a reformer, even a hero. She never used those words. She said she was a translator. Someone who turned silence into action, grief into legislation, and memory into accountability. That was her role now, to carry what others left behind and build with it. One morning, a package arrived without warning. No name, just a return address from Argentina. Inside was a photograph. It showed Cole, older, rough around the edges, standing beside a group of children at a relief camp. Behind him, a mural painted on cracked concrete, "Truth Never Sleeps." She smiled gently. He was alive. And he was still trying to undo the things he'd once been part of. Redemption wasn't always public. Sometimes it happened in places where no camera could see. The final project of her life became the archive, a permanent digital and physical repository of every document, testimony, and mission related to covert military operations that led to abuse, silence, or death. Not to shame the institutions, but to remind them of what happens when oversight fails. It was funded by international grants, supported by scholars, and guarded like sacred ground. At the archive's opening, a plaque stood at the entrance, engraved with simple words: "This is not revenge. This is remembrance with consequences." She attended quietly. No speeches. No press. Just a walk through the halls of truth built brick by brick from the wreckage of her own heartbreak. Near the end of her journey, she wrote one last letter. Not for Congress. Not for lawyers. For Daniel. "I kept going, even when I wanted to stop. I spoke when they told me to be silent. I broke rules they thought would hold me. You died doing the right thing. I lived trying to prove it mattered." She never remarried. Not out of sorrow, but out of completeness. Daniel's presence never faded. He lived in the work, in the policy, in the kids saved by the ones who learned from her battle. Love, in her world, had become something deeper than romance. It had become legacy. When she finally passed, years later, the news didn't flood with tribute. There were no parades. Just quiet acknowledgement from the ones who understood. Her foundation continued. The archive grew. New names joined the cause. She had changed something permanent. In her absence, people still visited Daniel's grave. Now, next to it, a second marker rested, not a grave, but a memorial. It read, "Amelia Clark, she didn't let them silence him. She didn't let them forget. Ask ChatGPT."